December 16th, 1944. 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks erupted through the Fogbound Ardennes Forest, a quiet sector defended by only 80,000 inexperienced Americans who had no idea what was about to hit them. This is the story of Hitler's final gamble, a desperate winter offensive that achieved shocking initial success but shattered against freezing American defiance at a small Belgian crossroads called Bastogne. The battle would destroy Germany's last reserves and seal the Reich's fate. This is the Battle of the Bulge. The Ardennes was supposed to be the safest place on the Western Front, a place where green troops could gain experience and exhausted veterans could rest. Allied commanders believed the war was nearly over. France and Belgium had been liberated. The front stretched from the Netherlands to Switzerland, stable and favorable. The Ardennes sector seemed so quiet that Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower positioned his weakest forces there. The 28th and 106th Infantry Divisions held the line with roughly 80,000 men scattered across miles of forest. Nobody expected trouble. Hitler saw opportunity where the Allies saw safety. He committed Germany's last reserves to Operation Wacht am Rhein, an overly ambitious plan his own field commanders doubted was feasible. The objective was staggering: capture the vital port of Antwerp, split the British and American armies, and force a separate peace with the Western Allies. Hitler believed a decisive blow in the West could reverse Germany's fortunes and allow the Reich to focus on the Soviet threat in the East. The numbers told the story of German advantage. Hitler assembled 200,000 troops with 1,000 tanks, predominantly Panthers and Tigers, and 2,000 artillery pieces, the 5th Panzer Army under Manteuffel, the 6th SS Panzer Army under Dietrich, and the 7th Army under Brandenburger, formed a massive spearhead aimed at the heart of Allied lines. Against this force stood 80,000 Americans with significantly fewer tanks and artillery. The Germans achieved a 3-to-1 numerical advantage at the point of attack. Nature became Hitler's ally. Heavy fog and snow reduced visibility to under 100 yards. Snow depths reached 30 centimeters. The dense forests and poor roads of the Ardennes, the same route Germany had used successfully in 1940, concealed the German buildup. Ultra-intelligence had noted increased German activity and intercepted some communications, but Allied commanders largely ignored these warning signs. General Bradley had minor concerns, but never anticipated the scale or timing of what was coming. At dawn on December 16th, the forest exploded. American soldiers described the shock and chaos of the early morning artillery barrage, followed by German armored columns emerging from the fog and snow. Private accounts detail seeing tanks looming out of the mist and the deafening roar of shell fire. Many units were quickly overrun. Survivors reported confusion, fear, and desperate withdrawal through icy woods as German forces punched through the Losheim Gap and raced westward. The next day brought an atrocity that would harden American resolve. On December 17th, German SS troops executed 84 American prisoners of war near Malmedy. News of the massacre spread quickly among U.S. units, increasing bitterness and reducing willingness to accept German surrenders throughout the battle. The Malmedy massacre became a rallying point for American troops fighting in the snow, but as German panzers punched through American lines and raced westward, one small Belgian town stood directly in their path, a crossroads that would determine the fate of the entire offensive. Bastogne was a town nobody had heard of, but its 7 roads made it the key to the entire Ardennes. German forces pushed deeper into Allied territory with alarming speed. By December 18th, they had captured Saint-Vith and were closing on Bastogne from multiple directions. By December 19th to 22nd, German units reached within 5 miles of the Meuse River at Celle, the deepest penetration of the offensive. The bulge in Allied lines grew wider and more dangerous. Hitler's gamble appeared to be working. Inside the encirclement, American defenders faced conditions designed to break them. Temperatures frequently dropped as low as -10 degrees Celsius. Bitter cold and frost made every movement agony. Snow depths reaching 30 centimeters turned simple tasks into exhausting ordeals. Weapons froze, equipment failed, soldiers wrapped their feet in whatever cloth they could find to prevent frostbite. The 101st Airborne Division and attached units held Bastogne against overwhelming odds. Supply lines were cut, ammunition was rationed to the last bullet, food ran short. Medics improvised surgeries without anesthesia on the wounded, working in freezing cellars and damaged buildings. Soldiers endured constant shell fire as German artillery pounded the town day and night. The defenders could hear enemy tanks circling their perimeter but couldn't see them through the fog. The weather that had helped Germany achieve surprise now crippled the Allied response. Heavy fog grounded Allied air support during the critical early days of the battle. The Allies' most decisive advantage, total air superiority, sat useless on airfields across France and Belgium. German forces could move and attack without fear of fighter bombers and heavy bombers that had dominated European skies since D-Day. Yet the defense at Bastogne disrupted the entire German timetable. The town's 7 roads were essential for moving supplies and reinforcements to the spearhead units racing toward the Meuse. Without Bastogne, German columns were funneled into vulnerable routes that slowed their advance. The delay gave Allied commanders time to rush reinforcements to threatened sectors and organize a coherent response. Another critical delay occurred at Saint-Vith, where American units, including the 7th Armored Division, held the crossroads for 6 days against repeated German assaults. The defense of Saint-Vith prevented German forces from exploiting their early gains and further disrupted Hitler's tight schedule. Every hour of delay mattered. The offensive depended on capturing key objectives quickly before Allied reinforcements could arrive. On December 22nd, with the noose tightening around Bastogne, German commanders delivered an ultimatum demanding surrender and waited for the American response that would define the battle. The German officers expected a formal military response to their surrender ultimatum. What they got was a single word that would echo through history. General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, received the German surrender demand on December 22nd. His response became legendary. When presented with the ultimatum, McAuliffe exclaimed, "Nuts!" Staff officers suggested he use it as the official reply. The single word was delivered to the German envoys, who struggled to understand its meaning. When explained that it meant the same as "go to hell," the German officers departed in confusion. McAuliffe's "nuts" response was more than colorful language. It symbolized American resolve at the moment of maximum danger. The refusal to surrender maintained control of the critical crossroads and prevented German forces from maintaining their offensive timetable. Stars and stripes publicized the response, and it spread through American units fighting across the Ardennes. The defenders of Bastogne became symbols of defiance against Hitler's last throw of the dice. Then nature shifted sides. On December 23rd, the skies began to clear. By December 25th, visibility improved dramatically across the battlefield. The fog and snow that had grounded Allied aircraft for 9 critical days lifted. What followed was devastating for German forces. Allied air power unleashed hell on German columns. Fighter bombers attacked tanks, trucks, and troop concentrations that had been moving freely during the fog. Heavy bombers struck German supply lines and fuel depots. The Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945, a desperate attempt to destroy Allied aircraft on the ground, but the attack failed and cost Germany over 1,000 aircraft. It could never replace American and British planes dominated the skies, exploiting Germany's vulnerability once weather conditions shifted. German soldiers and officers who had initially expressed optimism and confidence now faced reality. Fuel shortages stranded tanks in the snow. Bitter cold caused equipment failures. Supply columns were destroyed from the air before they could reach forward units. Letters and diaries from German troops reveal growing despair and the realization that the offensive was failing. One soldier wrote that the dream of victory died in the snow. The turning point marked the moment when American psychological defiance combined with returning Allied material superiority to overwhelm German tactical gains. The balance had shifted, but defiance alone couldn't break the siege. Bastogne needed relief, and it needed it fast, requiring a military maneuver that seemed impossible. Patton promised Eisenhower he could pivot his entire army northward in 48 hours. His staff thought he was insane. General George Patton executed one of the most remarkable operational feats of the entire war. On December 22nd to 23rd, his Third Army began a 90-degree pivot from its positions in the south, redeploying northward toward Bastogne. The 4th Armored Division moved 150 miles in 19 hours using pre-planned contingency orders and excellent staff coordination. Patton's aggressive leadership and operational flexibility turned what seemed impossible into reality. On December 26th, Patton's forces broke through to Bastogne. Inside the town, survivors recalled tears of joy and the sense of salvation as relief columns arrived. The siege was over. The defenders had held for 10 days against overwhelming odds in freezing conditions. The crossroads remained in American hands. The relief of Bastogne began a month-long Allied counteroffensive that systematically eliminated the German Bulge. American forces pushed east, retaking towns including Houffalize and eventually St. Vith. British forces attacked from the north. German units that had exhausted themselves in the initial offensive now faced coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The bulge that had threatened to split the Allied armies was compressed and eliminated. American forces inflicted devastating casualties during the counterattack. German units that had pushed deep into Allied territory found themselves trapped in exposed salients. Supply lines were cut. Reinforcements couldn't reach forward positions. Units that had fought their way west now had to fight their way back east just to survive. Many didn't make it. By January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. Allied forces had pushed German units back to their starting positions. The front was restored. The crisis had passed. But the true cost of Hitler's gamble was only beginning to become clear. As American forces compressed the Bulge and pushed German units back, the true cost of Hitler's gamble became devastatingly clear. Hitler had promised his generals that the Ardennes offensive would change the course of the war, and he was right, just not in the way he intended. Germany suffered approximately 81,000 casualties, 15,000 killed, 40,000 wounded, and 26,000 captured or missing. The Reich lost roughly 700 tanks, and over 1,000 aircraft. German forces also lost approximately 4,000 vehicles to Allied air attacks and mechanical failures. These were losses Germany could never replace with the war entering its final months. Hitler had committed Germany's last strategic reserves to Operation Wacht am Rhein. Elite panzer divisions, including the 1st SS Panzer Division and the 5th Panzer Army, were critically weakened. Much of Germany's remaining fuel, armor, and manpower had been consumed in the Ardennes. The offensive left nothing for defense of the Reich itself, as Soviet forces prepared their final assault from the east and Allied armies closed from the west. The offensive's failure left Germany incapable of mounting another major offensive operation. The strategic initiative passed permanently to the Allies. German forces would spend the remaining months of the war in defensive positions, retreating steadily toward Berlin. The road to Germany's heart was now open, and nothing remained to block it. American forces suffered approximately 89,000 casualties, 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 captured or missing. The Battle of the Bulge became the costliest battle in U.S. Army history. Americans lost about 800 tanks and tank destroyers, but America could replace these losses. Factories across the United States continued producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. Fresh divisions arrived from training camps. The industrial and manpower advantage that had always favored the Allies reasserted itself. By mid-January 1945, the Bulge was eliminated, but the real victory wasn't measured in territory. It was measured in the German divisions that would never fight again. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last roll of the dice, a shocking surprise attack through the Ardennes that initially threatened to split the Allied armies, but instead shattered against the freezing defiance of American defenders at Bastogne and the rapid Allied counterattack. The battle's true significance wasn't the temporary bulge in Allied lines. It was the permanent destruction of Germany's last reserves, those 81,000 casualties. 700 tanks and 1,000 aircraft could never be replaced. The elite panzer divisions that Hitler had hoarded for his final gamble were gone. The fuel reserves were exhausted. The manpower was dead, wounded, or captured. When the snows melted in the Ardennes, they revealed not just the wreckage of Hitler's final offensive, but the corpse of Germany's ability to wage war. The road to Berlin was now open, and nothing remained to block it. 3 months later, Soviet forces would raise their flag over the Reichstag. The war in Europe would end in unconditional surrender. The soldiers who held Bastogne in temperatures of minus 10 degrees Celsius, who fought with frozen weapons and dwindling ammunition, who answered surrender demands with a single defiant word, they had done more than survive a siege. They had broken the back of the German war machine. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's gamble. It was also his epitaph.